What is going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. So it's no secret that the Pittsburgh Penguins are on an absolute heater, kind of out of nowhere. After trading Jake Gensel at the deadline, they have really found their groove after blowing that lead to the Colorado Avalanche 2 weeks ago. And now people are clamoring for Sidney Crosby to potentially, if they end up making the playoffs, either be a finalist or maybe even win the goddamn Hart Trophy, to which I think that's absolutely ridiculous. Yes, he's having a very good season. So we're going to go over today why I think this is absolute bogus. He shouldn't really sniff a ballot in general. Maybe you can maybe make an argument for fourth or fifth, but I just can't believe I'm seeing this narrative. It is so ridiculous when looking at it. So I have a bunch of stats to run through, overall narratives regarding Crosby, previous examples of that people are trying to use to say, oh, Crosby's dragging his team to the playoffs. So without further ado, let's get into it. And when looking at the Pittsburgh Penguins, he's obviously extremely valuable to this team. He's leading the team in points by 23, as well as goals by 14, even though Brian Rust did miss 20 games. So yeah, he's one of the most valuable players overall in the NHL. Not top five, but he's very important to his team. He's on an absolute tear, dragging this team to the playoffs. And that is definitely impressive. But when you look at the other Hart contenders, he doesn't really stack up when looking at the point leader gaps. Kucherov leads the pack. He leads his team by 51 points. Pastrnak, it's 41. Panarin, 40. McKinnon, 31. McDavid, 28. Crosby, 23. And Austin Matthews, obviously the lowest, him and William Nylander. But he does lead his team in goals by a shit ton. So he doesn't have that going for him. He's sixth in terms of the overall point gap. How much are you leading your team? I understand that the Pittsburgh Penguins aren't as talented as some of those teams, so that Crosby's not going to be putting up 130 points, but considering how far in terms of the gap, the difference between him and Kucherov, that obviously matters. And when you look at the percentage of team goals that they're involved with, he also ranks ninth. He's with Austin Matthews in that category. When looking at it, Kucherov, McDavid, McKinnon, Panarin, Pastrnak, all above 40%. Crosby behind guys like Robert Thomas, JT Miller, and Kirill Kaprizov. So yes, when looking at it, he's very valuable to his team, but he's not as valuable as obviously the other guys. And when you stack on top the fact that the overall NHL, he's 51 points behind Nikita Kucherov. So he's not as valuable to his team individually, while also getting absolutely lapped by some of these other top tier contenders for the Hart Trophy. And it's not like he's that high in goals. He's also 24 goals behind Austin Matthews for the lead. Guys like Panarin, Pastrnak all have more goals. So I don't see the argument. And when looking at the individual team success, yes, I understand that they would not be a playoff team without Sidney Crosby. Obviously, that goes without saying, but I hate when people boil it down to that when regarding the Hart Trophy, because guys like McDavid, like McKinnon, they shouldn't be Panarin, they shouldn't be punished. Pastrnak, they shouldn't be punished for just having better teams. When looking at this, people always say with Crosby, without Crosby, they'd be a bottom five team in the NHL. Let me pull this up real quick. Without Crosby, they probably maybe would be a bottom five team because they're only 13 points away from being a bottom five team. It's not like the Pittsburgh Penguins are that good of a team. They're on pace for 88 points. The only reason why they are in a wild card race is because the Metro and Atlantic divisions, middle of the pack, absolutely suck. Nobody wants to win right now. So I don't think someone like a Panarin should be punished for the fact that he's leading his team to 115, 116 points, that the difference between the Penguins and the fifth to last worst team in the NHL is 13 points versus the difference between the Rangers and the Penguins is 27. It's double right now. I think we could agree if you do take Panarin off the Rangers, they're probably 102 point team. So the gap in terms of points, if you took them off, is about identical. Look at the Oilers. Everybody says the Oilers without McDavid wouldn't be a playoff team. Well, if they're not going to be a playoff team, let's say that they'd be about the St. Louis Blues. That's a 12-point difference. So I hate how it really boils down to some people saying, oh, if you remove this player, they'd be in the playoffs. Yeah, the Colorado Avalanche probably would maybe still make the playoffs if they didn't have Nathan McKinnon, but they'd be a 90, 92, 93-point team. They would obviously drop off massively. We cannot just put this insane emphasis on would they be a playoff team without this guy? It is so stupid. When you boil it down to that, the difference between just barely missing the playoffs and making the playoffs. Yes, the goal of the sport is obviously to make the playoffs, but I hate when it gets boiled down to. When looking at Nikita Kucherov, I understand the point of him. If the Kucherov wasn't on the team, they wouldn't be on the playoffs. But he also has everything going for him in terms of being the most valuable player on his given team, with the point gap being the biggest at 51, as well as the fact that obviously he's leading the entire NHL in points right now. So Kucherov has the narrative of, oh, if he wasn't on the team, they wouldn't be in the playoffs, as well as arguably being the best player in the entire NHL this season. That has not been the case with Sidney Crosby when looking at it. He's been great offensively, but he has been worse defensively than a McKinnon, than a Matthews, than a McDavid. It's not like has 85 points, 40 goals, 45 assists, and is playing Selke level defense. That's not the case. So just when looking at this, although yes, he's been great down the stretch for this team in their last 8 games. When looking at his first 69 games, they were, again, very good. 33 goals, 33 assists, 69 points in 69 games. That's not close to Hart level. They were a 500 team. So the fact that people are just... I don't like to use the word stupid, but it is pretty stupid. The fact that people are just narrowing this down to the final 13 games of the season. He's playing fantastic. He's carrying his team and not caring about the overall body of work in a season. Kucherov has been doing this every single month, every single game, carrying this Lightning team. And I've heard some comparisons to Taylor Hall back in 2018. When looking at Taylor Hall, he obviously won the Hart back in 2018, but I think it's massively different when looking at that. Taylor Hall arguably was the best player in the entire NHL when he won the Hart back in 2018, and also the fact that he had a much worse team than Sidney Crosby back in 2018. Again, you look at this, you look at this. Goddamn, Niiko Heiskanen and Paul Murray was his 2 other best forwards, as well as Will Butcher as his number 1 defenseman versus Erik Karlsson and Chris Letang. So it's such a bad comparison when you also factor in the fact that he was only, where's Hall on that? He was only 15 points back of the Art Ross. Again, Crosby's 51 right now. He played 6 less games than Connor McDavid. So if he played those other 6 games, he would have hit the 100-point mark and only been 8 points back, as well as only being 10 points back of the goal lead than Ovechkin, who had 49, while also playing 6 less games than Alexander Ovechkin. So when looking at Taylor Hall back then, he was a no doubt top 3 player in the entire NHL that season, arguably the best. He also had fantastic defensive numbers that year. He was a true top 3 player, as well as also dragging one of the most talent deficient teams in recent NHL memory. When you look at that Devils team, they might be the worst team. I'm not kidding. The worst team to make the playoffs since 2015 or something like that. They were horrendous. Again, rookie Niiko Heiskanen was their second leading scorer. He actually fully dragged the entire season to 97 points. Again, going back to what I said earlier in the video, the Penguins are only on pace for 88 points. The fact Taylor Hall, legitimate top 3 player, 9-point better team based on what they're on pace for right now, as well as the fact that he was up there in terms of points, in terms of goals. That was a proper most valuable in terms of dragging your team while also being a top 3 player in the entire NHL. Sidney Crosby this year has not been a top 5 player in the NHL. There's an argument that he hasn't been a top 10 player in the entire NHL. He's just on an absolute heater to end the season, which is very impressive. Again, I could maybe see you have him as a 5th place guy, but to have him over a Kucherov, over a McKinnon, over a Panarin and Pastrnak, I think at this point is ridiculous. When you look at the point gap and considering they have more goals, I think that's ridiculous. I think you're just coasting off Sidney Crosby's name. You want to give him that one last ride, give him a high Hart finish, but he is just not compared to these other guys. And if you do put him on your Hart ballot, you're saying you only care about the final 13 games of the season and you only care about the teams that fringe make the playoffs compared to other guys. Kucherov back in 2019, they had 129 points. He still won the Hart because he was the best player. And the reason why the Tampa Bay Lightning had the most points in a season, like post-lockout that year, was because of Nikita Kucherov, was because he was the best player in the NHL that season. The fact that we now are having this argument of a Sidney Crosby just because they played so good down the stretch. And again, the other thing with this Penguins team is they had high expectations coming into the season. Although they didn't meet them, they ended up trading Jake Gensel. That 2018 Devils team, they had no expectations. They ended up making the playoffs. So the fact that the Penguins are having this good stretch, and as a result, people are acting like Sidney Crosby is a legitimate Hart contender, I just absolutely hate it. You got to look at relative, how much value you bring to a team. And I think the other guys ahead of him clearly have been more valuable overall to your team, although they wouldn't be worse. The Rangers wouldn't be worse, as bad as the Penguins if you removed Crosby and if you removed Panarin. Obviously, that goes without saying. They have better teams. So when looking at this, I don't think I'm ridiculous for saying this. Sidney Crosby should not sniff a top 3 of a Hart ballot. I wouldn't have him on my top 5. It is just people loving the name of Sidney Crosby, loving what he's done down the stretch, but the overall body of work is not nearly close to Hart level. He's not doing what Kucherov's doing in terms of leading the NHL in points, dragging his team to the playoffs, and he's not even doing what Taylor Hall did it back in 2019 when he was a top 3 player in the entire NHL. The Hart Trophy, while the most valuable player, it's not the most valuable player who, if you remove them off your team, they wouldn't make the playoffs. That's all I got to say. I know he's going to get a shit ton of Hart ballot votes over guys The one guy I can make an argument for is Austin Matthews, just because he's only by 4. You could maybe say, oh, Sidney Crosby more valuable to assume. I would understand that, but everybody else that I listed, it's not really debated. And again, even Austin Matthews, he has 24 more goals. So let me know in the comments, what do you think? This is just something that kind of infuriated me over the last couple of days on Twitter, because the Penguins have been playing great. There's no denying that. And Sidney Crosby is still a top 12 player in the entire NHL. But this season, missed me with him being a goddamn Hart finalist. I still would have Connor Hellebuyck probably over. I might even mention him in this video. Let me know in the comments, what do you think? And I'll be seeing you in the next one.